Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we are solving maximum matrix sum. And in this problem, we are given an n by n integer matrix, and we can perform this operation as many times as we want, which is that we can choose any two adjacent elements and multiply each of them by -1. And our goal is to maximize the summation of the matrix elements. So we want to return the maximum sum of the matrix elements using the operation that's mentioned here. So if we look at this example, we can multiply the top two elements first and then multiply these two. So now all the numbers are 1 and the max sum would be 4, so we return 4. And in this example, we can multiply these two numbers, so now they are positive and the sum will be 16 if we add these all together. So now that we have seen some examples, let's get to how we can solve this problem. So to solve this problem, we should ask ourselves these two questions first. First is that optimally, what is the least number of negative numbers that there can be? And it will be 1 if it is odd originally and 0 if it is even originally. Because if there are even numbers of negative numbers, then we will multiply out all the negative ones together and all of them can now be positive. If it is odd, then all the other ones will multiply themselves and both become positive and one of them will be left negative. So if it is odd, then what would be the number that we should leave negative? And it should be the smallest number, obviously, but more so the smallest absolute value. So if it's like 1 or -20, then we should make 1 negative and make this positive. So remember the smallest absolute value. So what we can do is we can iterate through the matrix and add all the values, and if they are negative, we will add by the absolute value of those negative numbers. And afterwards, if there are even number of negative numbers, we can just return the sum. If it is odd, then we will return the sum minus 2 times the smallest absolute value. And we need to multiply by 2 because the first time would be that we have to take it away from the fact that we added it here first, and the second time would be that because it's a negative number, so we have to subtract it. By the way, if the formula was hard to read, this is how the formula looks like. So let's go over this example real quick. Minimum would be to keep track of the minimum absolute value, and negatives will keep track of the number of negative values, and result will keep track of the sum. So first we come to 3. The minimum is currently 3, no negative values, result is 3. Now the minimum number is 2, we add 2, so result is 5. We add 1, total is 6, and the minimum number is now 1. Here's 1 negative number, and 7 to the sum, add 2 to the sum, 2 negative numbers, add 3 to the sum, and now there are 3 negative numbers. Now we add 1, which is 13. Now we add 2, which is 15. And now we add 3, which is 18. And the minimum number is 1, so we will need to subtract 2 times that number. So it would be 18 minus 2 times 1, and we will return 16 as our result. And as you can see, if we were to make this positive and this positive, and we sum this up, the sum would be 16. So the time complexity would be O of n times m, where n is a number of rows and m is a number of columns, because that's the number we will iterate through. And the space complexity would be O of 1, because the space that these variables take up will not depend on the size of the inputs. So now let's get to the coding part. So first we'll initialize result to 0, and we will set minimum to the float of infinity, and we will set negatives to 0. Now we will look through each row in matrix, and we will look at each value in the row, and we will add by the absolute of that value to result. And if the value is less than 0, meaning if it is negative, then we need to add negatives by 1, and the minimum number would be the minimum between minimum or the absolute value of the current value. And in the end, if there are an odd number of negative numbers, we need to subtract by 2 times minimum from result. And finally, we can return the result. All right, see if it works. Okay, perfect. Hope this was helpful. Thank you all for watching. If you have any other questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I hope to see you all again soon.